So today, talking about problematic chromatics, or how to make your sites colorblind friendly. We use color as a tool a lot for visualizations. I found this neat little interactive about why visualizations are so important. I was floating around on the internet a little while back. Basically, we just absorb visual information a lot faster than we absorb text information. And a lot of that has to do with colors and how we display colors. Unfortunately, not all colors are created equal. You could probably tell by the images I'm showing here which colors I'm focusing on. There are about 8% of the population who are colorblind. 5% are deuteranopia, I think I'm pronouncing that right, colorblind, which means they have red-green color confusion. And I can show you what that looks like here. So this is what these images look like to someone who is red-green colorblind. So can't tell the difference between peppers. The candlestick chart isn't really useful. There's a completely different number in that circle, and you can't really tell what's going on in the stock market's chart. So that's kind of a problem. Normally, when we create websites, we can create colorblind-friendly palettes, but this doesn't always fly depending on the website. If you're dealing with a lot of market data, you can't just make red and green, blue and yellow, and red and green to blue and yellow, and have like 95% of the population understand what that means. Yeah, sorry, I forgot to go ahead. But yeah, so we can do that. But this also doesn't solve, even if we do pick a colorblind friendly palette, that doesn't answer all types of colorblindness. There's like about 10. 3 of them are fairly common, which I can sort of demo here. Let me go back to the color slide so it's actually useful. You can sort of see what that looks like. The rest of them aren't, but depending on your user base, maybe that's important. So we're going to cover a couple different use cases. We basically want to create a colorblind option for your users instead of just creating a site that is accessible to everyone, because we have these other concerns like red and green. So the way we want to do that, we want to create a site that basically you want it to be colorblind friendly without impacting development. Don't really want to worry about colorblind stuff in the future as you're developing your CSS or JavaScript. You need to be able to handle CSS, JavaScript, and potentially images. And you might want to support multiple types of colorblind users. All right. So let's cover styles first. In SAS 3.3, you can use default variables. Basically, this means if you set a variable to be default, it will only be set to that value if it hasn't been set already. So if you look in this example I have my application as CSS. I set red and green to be default red and green colors. And then in my application Deuteranopia, I set red and green to be blue and yellow instead of actually red and green. And then I import the existing application in there. So basically we can continue doing all of our development in the application SCSS and not really worry about the colorblind style sheet, because it'll just be generated by application Deuteranopia automatically. So now we have these two style sheets. How do we load this on our site? One way that's pretty common with this type of configuration is you would namespace your colorblind style sheet, set a cookie if the user selects that they're colorblind, and then toggle the class based on that. But that's kind of a pain to do. And if you're dealing with multiple types, it kind of gets annoying, and we want to cover JavaScript later, so it might get a little hairy. So instead what we're going to do is get rid of all that other stuff and just simply set the style sheet if the user is colorblind. And I'll explain what I mean by that after I talk about Basket.js a little bit. Basket.js is a really lightweight JavaScript library that allows you to store your assets in local storage. And it comes with expiry, headers, and all that good stuff. A little bit of background on it. It was initially created for because storing assets in local storage is actually significantly faster in mobile, or at least it was in 2011 when this case study was written. I know I looked at some performance things recently, and it's still mostly the case, and Google and Bing are still using these, still using local storage asset, still using local storage as their asset manager. If you look into your browser resources, you can see that, which is kind of cool. So it's kind of a cool article here. I did a little case study, which I'm actually going to come back to after I show my demos. Basically, it doesn't hurt, and in some cases, it may even improve in performance. So this is basically how you would cache a style sheet in local storage. Can everybody see that? No. That's not. Yeah. Hold on. Let me change the resolution. I'm gonna have to. Is that better? I don't know. It looks fuzzy on mine now, so. I have all the code samples up too, but basically what's happening is you do a basket.require, pass in the URL. For style sheets, you want to set execute to false, and then here we're setting a key called styles, and then we use this library called create style sheet to basically append the styles to the DOM, and it's pretty simple. So once we do that, we can toggle the CSS that's loaded by basically clearing the key and then re-requiring with the correct CSS. So it's the same exact code, but instead of requiring application CSS, I'm requiring application deuteranopia CSS. So here's a little demo of that particular thing. Let me just go back to this real quick because it's not going to look so great. So here we go. Here's a little demo site. You can see these are all styled with CSS. We've got blues, yellows, blue and yellow instead of red and green. Here's the toggle. So I click that. It's back to red and green. I click it. It's blue and yellow. Oh, and when I refresh the page, it persists every time. So yeah. So that's how the CSS works. It's great. So now, how do we handle JavaScript? We basically want to share these colors across CSS and JavaScript. So we're going to use a Sass plugin called Sass JSON vars. You can find it on GitHub. Basically, it just allows you to create some sort of variable JSON and import that into Sass. And then, of course, you can use that in your JavaScript as well. So that's pretty handy. This is basically how I implemented the Sass here. So instead of having the colors set in application CSS, I import them from my colors JSON. And same thing for deuteranopia. I have a colors deuteranopia.json, and then I just import them. And I'm still using default variables and still generating the same style sheets. So now in our colorblind toggle, we simply override the colors.json, and once that's done, we reinit the JavaScript to basically just reload it. And in order to get the colors, you can use the basket API, which is down here. I'm just doing basket.get colors and then the data, and that'll give you all the colors. So let's see what that looks like. Over here, this is the non-colorblind version. Toggle colorblind mode, works, great. Everything's loading correctly. And you can toggle back and forth. All right, so we've got JavaScript. Now, images. Images are a little tricky because you're not always sure what the contrast will be. If you're changing red and green to blue and yellow, you've solved the red and green confusion problem, but you're sort of introducing a red, yellow, and blue-green color confusion. So it might be useful for some images, but maybe not all of them. But we're going to cover this case just to say we did it. How we're going to do this is we're going to use the image tag and a canvas element. This is a lot of code that's probably really small. Let me see if this makes it any better a little bit. So basically what's happening is I'm getting all of the images on this site and looping through them, appending a canvas element, and then running it through a filter. And the filter's over here. Basically, if it's mostly red, I'm changing it to yellow by sort of averaging red and green. And if it's mostly green, I switch green and blue. Yeah, so that's where the color confusion comes in. But that sort of leaves us with this. So now you can see the 74. The reason it's a little fuzzier looking than this image is because of the color confusion I was talking about. You can see that these points here are a little more yellow, but this is certainly a lot better. If I can. This is definitely a lot better than, oh, I gotta scroll down, sorry. Than this, where you can't see the numbers at all. So there's definitely a use case for creating colorblind images. Maybe you have a picture of a chart that you want to show, but it shouldn't be applied universally to all images. Okay. So here's the limitations I was mentioning. It is kind of cool though, because you can use the same canvas technique for images, for video. I have a little demo. Hold on, let me, because this isn't really gonna mean much. I've got an image here. It's like red and green peppers, and if you look at it here, you can see it's sort of converted to blue and yellow. Is that clear? Yeah. So that's using the exact same filter that you used for the image, and then just drawing it on the video. So that's cool. So now we've got video, images, styles, and JavaScript all handled with for colorblind accessible, all handled for colorblind accessibility. We're loading all these things into local storage. Obviously, there might be some compatibility issues there if you're concerned about like IE8, but we're also using canvas elements, so just be out of luck in that case. And we've developed these tools in a way that your CSS, JavaScript, it's all easily expandable. You can continue developing. A couple things I would like to do with this. I want to auto-detect if you need to filter images, basically by analyzing what colors are most present. I think this is doable, but I haven't actually tried it. And I'd like to use Basket with require.js. There is a small library that was created by the same guy who wrote Create Style Sheet that allows you to do this, but I didn't get a chance to play around with it. So haven't tried that yet. This is the GitHub repo where I've got all the example code, and you can follow me at Tycho's Drunk Elk. Some references if you want it. And that's all I got. Any questions?
Yeah, in regards to integrating that type of control into the user interface, like what, like how prominent do you think that should be? Like, oh, hey, if you're colorblind, click here. But, you know, a person might be like, oh, I know what color.
Yeah. Well, I guess it sort of depends on your site. If you don't have a lot of red and green on your site, or it's not really a huge issue, then I would say it doesn't have to be very prevalent at all. Maybe a setting on like some user page or in the footer, just say, if you're colorblind, please click here. But if you have some sort of like market data chart or a map that has like red and green colors, I think it's definitely worth at least putting something right below that that says, if you're colorblind, please view the accessible version here. I think a lot of the times I've seen it in the past is it's in the footer, because again, it's 8% of the population, so it's not a huge number. But yeah, I guess it depends on the data you're showing.
Has nobody built like a Chrome plugin or anything that can do a lot of this stuff?
So there's like a lot of filters. Kind of depends. I don't really like to rely on plugins. I think that websites should handle accessibility issues. And colorblindness is maybe sort of a smaller one, but it's definitely doable. And really this, like, once you start doing this type of development, it's not really difficult, and the overhead after you do it is very small. So sort of like, why not? And it's kind of a cool thing. So
it seems like sort of real estate is always becoming more of a concern as people are very simplistic design. So actually having, you know, a link or a text field for colorblindness is sort of adding extra clutter to your site. Has there been any sort of movement towards maybe a kind of an icon or something like that that could be universally adopted?
you mean like
An icon, a picture that people would know to click on.
Oh, yeah. I don't know about that. That would be cool though. I'm not sure.
In your research, so most of this was focused on trying to give colorblind people the same experience with solid colors. In your research, did you ever come across anything that explored sort of the alternatives to color, like texture?
Yeah, so
or
patterns.
significations? Yeah.
Patterns is a big thing. I think pattern is definitely better than what you typically see on websites, which is text. Text is not the same experience at all. I mean, if I go back to the example I had here, oops, sorry, that's work. Sorry.
You didn't just see that.
No,
No one saw it.
I'm sorry.
Who's been recording?
Sorry, what was I showing?
Texture.
Texture, yes. Basically, if you look at this in the colorblind mode, you can see we've got these plus and minuses there, but if you glance at this, you're not going to know what that means. It takes a lot more like brain power to look at that. So yeah, I think texture is good. I think it's a little more difficult to apply with CSS, and you could potentially like make it difficult to read text on top of it, but you know.
Is there, sorry, sort of a follow-up. Did you come across any sort of taxonomy of texture? Because there's like the sort of the taxonomy of mapping emotion to color, and the reason why we use red and green for certain things.
I found a lot of different opinions depending on which site you go to. There's actually a couple resources for colorblind development. I think this tool I'm using up here is called Color Oracle, and if you go to their website, they have a lot of similar tools and recommendations. stuff like that is very useful. But there's a lot of different opinions about what textures are representative of what. The reason I was focusing on red and green so much was because those have very specific meanings. Textures, I don't know of like any texture that would mean something specifically. Anything else?
Is there anything to research into utilizing metadata? Like, I mean, we have alt text for people who are deaf, but
Yeah.
Is there any way to, or for the future, where maybe a browser could have a setting where someone could have a
Yeah.
an always-on flag?
I think the setting would be great, and if you could read that, that would be awesome. I don't know of any movement towards that. Again, it's yeah, that'd be cool. But no, I don't know of anything. Anything else?
I have a question. So do people, so I don't know anyone who's colorblind except my father who says he's colorblind. Do people typically know what kind they are? Like if there was a link that said future,
Oh.
like do people know, oh, I'm this colorblind?
There are tests you can take. Basically, you arrange colors into a palette, and depending on where you put them, it'll show you where your color confusion is. So it's kind of cool. You can take these tests. One of my friends took this, and he is multiple types of colorblind, which I didn't even know you could be, but it was pretty interesting.
How do they feel about Christmas?
I don't know.
I'm serious. This is like we're talking about Christmas here.